We're recording. Okay.
It's kind of like-
I'd like to call to order the Human Resource Committee. We have all participants here. And we need approval for the agenda.
Second.
And no public comments that I've had. Rebecca, anything? And now we're on to health.
Our first item on the agenda is consideration by the committee of whether we add an additional level of a wellness incentive. Just as background information, our base plan is an 85% employer contribution to the health insurance premium, but employees currently have the ability to increase that to 88% employer contribution by completing the wellness assessment, which has changed. It's evolved over the last handful of years from a variety of things. The plan for that this year will be that all the employees would go to the wellness clinic and meet with our wellness clinic staff to be eligible to get to the 88% contribution. What we're proposing is now an additional level of 90% contribution if employees will become compliant in 4 areas based on what their age and gender is recommending for them. And those 4 areas are listed right there: a colonoscopy, which is age and family history dependent; mammogram, gender dependent; cervical cancer screening, gender dependent; and then blood work, including hemoglobin A1C and a lipid panel. And so again, those 4 things are areas, and we'll kind of touch on why those are in there. But that would allow someone to get to 90% contributions.
That's by 23, 24.
But so we would, again, if the board and committee and the board advance this idea, the wellness assessments would begin in November. And by the end of May in 2023, individuals would need to have the assessment and this part completed, and that would affect their insurance premium for 23-24. And so a little bit of the background information. This proposal went through for review with the insurance committee. Very minimal questions. The questions that they really had, the main one was, will the district as an employer start to have access to employee health information? And the answer to that is no. This is, again, like any other health information, it's going to live with the health professionals. And so all we'll get is a monthly and then final report saying who has complied to receive this. So it's a yes or no. They're either on the list or they're not. And so we won't know what was recommended, if anything, and what was found, if anything. The only individuals who know that would be the healthcare professional and the employee.
Are there staff on the committee? On the insurance committee?
Yeah, the insurance committee is 2 board members, 2 teachers, 2 members of the classified staff, our employee benefits specialist, and myself.
And Steve.
Oh, yeah. And Steve.
But he's always so
And
quiet at that
Steve.
meeting.
Does he
Yeah.
get to sit at the table or at the back?
Yeah, no, he's right at the table and everything. So he's right there.
No problem.
I don't like to do anything without Steve here. Yeah.
And so some of the information behind that was what was provided in the attachments. And so the first is just the background, the PowerPoint. The first one is kind of some of the background information behind this. This evolved from conversations with our benefit advisor, USI. And as you probably noticed in that PowerPoint, they had done a pretty extensive study to allow them to kind of give us some of this information. And really, I think the two pages that probably point to what we're going to fold into next is the financial reason why is talked about on page or slide 7. It talks about for every 10% in additional adult preventative care visits, we can expect to avoid 4% of annual inpatient hospital costs and 1% of emergency room visits. And again, as we'll fold into the financial stuff, there's a identifiable dollar value based on history that we can talk about for there. But how do they get to that? They also, if you go to slide 9, that's probably the most powerful. That it starts to show the why. The benefit is not just to the employee, which obviously there is a tremendous benefit to the employee to find out a health issue before it becomes a health problem. But early, capturing these things early makes a tremendous amount of difference, not only in the recovery or survival of the individual, but also the cost to a health plan. Early treatment is much more cost effective and health effective than later treatment. And so, that's again, and their sources for that information are listed on the bottom, of that screen. And again, there's other things, but I think that's probably the most powerful screen of how they get to this number, or why they get this number. And then if we take a look at the next actual attachment, we can start to talk about some of the financial aspect. What does this mean to us? So on the current top of that screen, a little bit of this is based on this year. And so again, I think something important for all of us to keep in the back of our mind is what next year's health plan will look like is still being defined. And so this is, again, this year's information for costs, and last year, same thing. And we're looking at, health care claims for last year. So again, contribution levels, when I say cost of 85, cost of 88, cost of 90, that's the employer cost. That's our contribution. Our membership, how many employees have taken which type of plan. And then I think, as we start to think about what might this cost and what might this benefit to us, then we start to see some historical data. Currently, 97.2% of our employees get 88% contribution, which is an exceptionally high number. I mean, it's essentially very close to all of them choose to participate in the wellness assessment. We don't know with any kind of absolute certainty how many will take this next step of doing the 4 tests if they would, but we could start to extrapolate from there, assuming a couple of, and again, I guess before we jump into that, what is 4% of inpatient claims? That's $53,130.79. 1% of emergency room claims for us last year, $5,368.98. Those are that's based on our claims for last year. And so now if we start to talk about what could this potentially cost if we go to it, I used as the upper limit 97.2%. I mean, it's unlikely to believe that anyone that won't do a health assessment to get to an 88% contribution, very unlikely to do anything, to all of a sudden start doing that and go further and do those 4 tests. But as we started that, and then I started to show you as it broke down what it meant. So when we say additional benefit, that additional benefit is how much we, based on this historical data, how much we could likely expect to have our medical claims go down. by individuals doing that. And I guess, I mean, you see that, as the high, obviously the higher the participation level, it makes a significant amount of difference in terms of our claims change.
Randy, you want to talk about the change that we're also proposing to get to 88%?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think I did mention that, they're going to see our health clinic staff. Yeah, so this conversation and these recommendations would come from our health clinic staff to the employees. And so that was, I think, thank you, Steve, a really important part of the conversation too, is that one, we want to really encourage employees to go to our clinic because of, it is a, using the economic term, it's a sunk cost right now. We are funding that clinic, and the more that we use it, the better it is for us, and better it is for employees too, because that's there's no co-pays, there's no deductibles at that. It's again a financial benefit to them, and there's also the benefit that our clinic staff can really spend the time in conversations with individuals. I mean, they're, even with this, this movement to send folks there and the actions that the board took of opening it to all employees for use, we still have ample appointment times and clinic availability. And so, this is, I think, a chance for them to really sit with a health professional, not necessarily just a wellness coach, which is some of the things that we have done in the past, but someone that's a trained medical professional to really get folks the information they need about why this is good for them and what do they need, kind of thing.
Brian, when it says additional benefit savings of 300, so that's savings in health costs because of the screenings, et cetera. And does that then transfer to our premium savings of 1.1%?
No, that's a great question, Joan. And so it's not as direct as that. Obviously, part of what the insurer is going to look at with us is called something called the medical loss ratio.
Right.
So, how are your claims running compared to what we're paying for premium?
So we're just looking at saving claims, and we don't really know. how
We
that
don't,
transfers.
there isn't really a way for us to say this will affect our premium in the future by.
Yeah, I get it.
So thank you. That is a very important distinction.
And do they look at that on a yearly basis, or they sort of like the trend, a history trend over the last few years? Or
I would say they look at an annual basis. Graceful reciprocation. Right? They're looking annually what your medical loss ratio is. They are looking at trend, but their actuaries are going deeper into it of, what's your population like? What, extrapolating what could it become? What are the health issues that you're experiencing? Are they ones that will continue? Are they ones that are, are there expenses that continue? Would it be expected to continue, or is this something that was handled within a claim year? But yeah, they'll review both things.
I would describe this as a natural evolution of our wellness clinic. We originally started, with this program years ago to have a mutual benefit to staff and then also to the health premium in the plan itself. As Brian stated, there's capacity out there at the wellness clinic to do more, to see more people. The 85 to 88% option that existed prior to what we're proposing could have been impactful. It also could not have been. And what I mean by that is there was a variety of options that you could take to get from 85 to 88%. One of them was to participate in the process that Dean offered. We provided a lot of feedback to them that we did not think that was impactful to someone's health. I went through that a couple times just to experience it. I also went through the 30-minute deep dive at the wellness clinic. and that is significantly impactful to a person's health. The ability of our wellness clinic to take a deep dive into a person's medical history. I was incredibly surprised at the fact that I shared this experience with the insurance committee. By going through that process, discovered a vaccine that none of my other doctors realized I hadn't taken. But she realized it by going like deep into my records and comparing it. You know, she said, "Hey, you haven't had this yet." And I said, "No, I've had everything. I've got like 3 doctors. I know." And she's like, "No, you haven't." And that's a deep dive that doctors can't typically take for a person. You know, they just can't. And so we viewed our learning experiences from that as something we want to share with all staff because we think it's a mutual benefit in the long run. We could have proposed what Brian just described as necessary to get to 88%. Right? We could have just completely swapped out what we had before and said to get to 88%, we're going to propose something totally new. But we think having staff participate in the potential health plan savings and incentivizing folks in a positive way is a little bit of a better process than maybe going the alternative route. So by incentivizing individuals to go from the 88% process, which they will have to do with the wellness clinic now, gives them the opportunity to take it to the next level and go to the 90% if their deep dive with our provider discovers medically appropriate, very important things that they need to do, right? So then the individual would make the choice. So I think it's important to note that no staff member will be required to do anything that's on the screen. You know, so if you go in and you're a 47-year-old male, you haven't gotten a colonoscopy, Sarah's going to say, "I looked through your records, I don't see this anywhere. It's now recommended at age 45. If you want to go to the next level, which is 90%, you have to schedule it. You have to go through the process, you have to schedule it, and then she'll be able to see the following year if the person followed through with it. But we view that as a mutual benefit to both the health plan itself and the individuals, which is why we're proposing this added incentive to go from 88 to 90. To Joan's point, we're upfront funding the added incentive, right? So July 1st of 2023, individuals would receive that additional 2%. The data that Brian shared is data that is well sourced that shows if you implement this program after July 1st, for folks who are going through this, your health cost claims are likely to drop by that dollar amount. But it's the same kind of concept the board had to look at with the wellness clinic. We had to invest in it up front and then know that over the long run, we would see that payback. So that's why we proposed what we did. We think it can be a really powerful change, and it has the potential to have our wellness clinic really truly go to the next step and be fully utilized. We also believe that if an individual hasn't been out there before and they go through this deeper medical dive with our provider, they will become more comfortable with our provider and the services that are offered there, and will be more likely to use it again.
If they have a family plan to get to the 90%, does the spouse have to complete the screenings?
And I believe that's in the PowerPoint as well. What we've proposed is a start where we're going to focus just with employees.
Okay.
And then we're going to start to move into, you know, we said that we put that on one of the slides of a potential change for next year. The following year, excuse me, 2 years out, would be looking at that, but to start with, just focusing with it on our employees.
So would somebody get credit? We started this in 52 and they just had a colonoscopy last year.
They would.
They get that checked off for
Yep. And
As long
so,
as they're in that period before they need another.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, these are not things that are required, these, none of, well, actually, I should say, I don't believe that any of these would be required annually for the typical patient. So as long as they're within a window of what their medical provider suggests, then they're fine. But certainly, I mean, depending on someone's health history, they might have to do more than someone else, similar age.
This agenda item and the next one are also going to be included on the budget committee agenda this Friday. And the reason for that is it is an initial outlay of funds for the 23-24 school year. And it really begins the dialogue about prioritization of costs. The one thing that's clear about this agenda item and the next one is ultimately in the end, the board will approve whatever plans and premiums that the board is comfortable with once the insurance committee is through our process. So we're not committing at this point to knowing what will that $6 million spend look like next year. But in order to move ahead with this process, we need a wider window for the wellness clinic to see people. In order to have that deeper dive completed, we can't do this like in March and April. So this portion of the agenda, we are looking for feedback from both the HR committee and the budget committee about this upfront investment in this process, with the understanding that ultimately in the end, as Brian has laid out, the health insurance process, which is next, the board will make the ultimate decision on that investment anyways.
Yeah, I like it. I think it's a good investment. That's great. I mean, I think that 97.2% will probably go to the next level, probably drop 50s, 60s. Just because of time.
Yeah.
They want to do it, but just trying to figure it into their schedule or something like that this year.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're gonna learn a lot about, for somebody that has to commit more than one stop, right? I mean, what will that follow through be? I think it is an unknown. I think this year will be helpful for us to figure that out because we don't know.
And some people don't want it.
Right.
There's a lot of different
Yeah,
reasons.
absolutely. There are different things.
It's a great benefit because I think it encourages wellness. It's not about, it is kind of about the money, but I think it's about people's health.
And this
Positive.
is, yeah, it's sustainable, but it's not like joining a health club and I have to go 3 days a week or something like that, and I'm being reimbursed. I mean, that's a little bit more long-term, more difficult sometimes to manage, but this is, something that you go in one time, find results.
So do you want a motion on this?
If the committee supports the idea, we would advance it to the board for their consideration.
I would support moving this to the board.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Great.
So our next, was there not an attachment included with that?
I didn't
Yeah,
touch
on ours there is.
There is, okay. Sorry, that initial moment of panic there. And so what this next one is really an initial discussion to get you as a committee considering what we want to do for our health plan next year. So as I kind of mentioned and Stephen mentioned, the insurance committee right now has already started to meet and is weighing out what our potential changes or what the structure of our health plan can be for next year. And so if you're looking at kind of like a copy,
Yeah.
I'll go make a couple copies. Sorry.
Did you want this to be public view?
Oh, that's right. And so Steve, I put it onto just the board view because of some of the information that was in there. Do you think it would be more appropriate for public view? Okay. All right, well, I'll make a copy and I'll be right back.
Today's a happy coffee. It's gonna be going all day long.
What else have you got?
Oh, the end of the day is 7:30 in the city of Middleton. If we can make it.
Oh, wow.
I think
Has been running both ends.
Do your meetings kind of end this week? Have you done?
No, we've got some next week. Got the senior center next week.
Do you have much response when
Did
you
you
were?
learn about this public view?
It doesn't, you can. It doesn't
Sure.
matter.
So have you had many people asking questions or coming to these? Doesn't seem like it, but
Last night we had about 10 at Heritage. Rotary is large. That was probably 50.
yeah, I would think Rotary would
We
have
have Lions Club tomorrow night.
those more than the village meetings and stuff. I think people are interested and they have influence from out from that.
Senior center next week. That'll be a good tell.
Nobody's come and been negative. I mean, been obviously just to
There's
know, I don't want
questions.
to do
I
this.
would just say that there's questions. Similarly to the questions you heard last night at the annual meeting.
But they're questions, they're not statements. So.
There's some are.
Steve, man, you guys can get a copy.
Could you blow that up on 8 plans?
Tell the copier cooperates and your copies are coming out. And so the other reason I had to include this in public view is just on the bottom, USI said that you asked to not reproduce it, so I didn't put it up there.
Something else came up.
It's fine.
Right.
So the topic of conversation is if we look kind of in the first two columns, or for second and third columns, so we've got one that's headed 7-1 of 21, 7-1 of 22. Those show you that we were within that 5-year rate hold. And if you kind of go down to the bottom third of the page, it talks about total annual employer premium contribution. It's in black. You see that we, the last 2 years, have been contributing about $6.3 million. That's been our annual cost for the healthcare plan that we offer to our employees. Then if you start to look at columns, the column headed 7-1 of 23, 7-1-23 copay coinsurance change, or 7-1-23 HSA plan. Those three columns are all examples of ways that the plan could be adjusted based on decisions that the insurance committee, HR committee, and full board would make for plan structure and employer contribution. But I think it's important to note that we're going to have to do one of two things in order to keep our contribution levels the same as we have in the past. We're either going to need to change again, one of two things has to happen. We're going to either have to change our plan because the plan will become more expensive for us to provide the same plan. So that's what that first column, that says 7-1 of 23 would give you an example of. With again, very minimal changes, our employer contribution would go up to $6.9 million. Or the other one is if we start to change the plan, you can affect your employer contribution. and again, employee as well, right? They trail with us, but I'm focused on what the district would have to contribute at this time. And so that starts to show, how making plan changes can affect contribution levels from the employer and employee. The question, I guess, that want you to start thinking about and maybe even sharing where your what your thoughts are now or questions are. Do you, as board members, HR committee, believe that the insurance committee should be seeking to keep that change in cost to zero? Should we expect to contribute more as an employer? What is appropriate for us for planning purposes for the insurance committee?
Just a couple things to add. There's two different types, I'll call them big picture changes to the insurance plan. One is truly a cost shift. Right, so if you take a deductible that's 200 and make it 500, you save premium on the district end, but you just added a $300 cost to most every staff member who's on the plan, right? That's just truly a cost shift. Other type of plan design changes are looking at more consumerism. So having individuals have the ability to avoid that additional cost. My personal preference is to look at those options because it would give someone an opportunity to make a choice to avoid costs if they choose to. So like as an example, in the traditional health plan, if a copay is changed from, let's say, 30 to 50, in many of the cases, I would have an opportunity to go to our clinic instead for free. So an example of that might be if I have a child with an ear infection, or I think there's an ear infection, I'm choosing whether I want to pay $50 or not, right? So that's a choice that the person's making. Now there's plenty of examples if you raise the copay to 50 where they can't make a choice because it is a very specific service that's not offered at the wellness clinic. So it's important to note that both of those things happen when you raise a copay, but it does provide the opportunity in many cases for a person to make a choice. The other plan design that we talked a lot about at the committee meeting was a total consumerism type plan that we've not offered before. And Brian and Al Yeager, our consultant, walked the committee through an education process as to what does that type of plan look like. There definitely was interest in the room for people to want to know more. The specifics of it is what ends up mattering most to folks. But in the end, we think looking at opportunities that introduce consumerism and choice as opposed to pure cost shifts is a better use of our time. We've asked Al Yeager to look at other examples of connecting our health plan to our wellness clinic that he's looking into right now to see what else might be available to be done in that way. But when you have, as Brian stated, a fixed cost at the wellness clinic, our goal is to get claims off the health plan and over to our free service that we offer as much as possible. So we want to design plans that incentivize that. The other thing to keep in mind is the budget planning process for 23-24 is of course going to be quite complicated. We have the potential operational referendum on November 8th, depending on how that vote goes. We have the state budget, which starts new. That will become, published sometime in the late winter, early spring. And until we can see the results of that information, we really do not know the resources that will be available to us in 23-24. I think it makes a lot of sense to have the committee go down a path of at least figuring out what a 0% increase would look like. So ultimately, the board could see that. And then what would a 3% increase look like, or a 5% increase look like? So you'd have the opportunity to see what do those various levels look like without necessarily committing upfront to, we're going to do 0 no matter what, or we're going to do 5% no matter what. When you don't have the information to really make a good decision, it makes sense, I think, for Brian to lead the committee through options that ultimately can be evaluated, hopefully at some point when we have better information about our next fiscal year.
So we would only have, we were looking to have one plan or have a choice where somebody could take a traditional HMO, or POS or high deductible at HSA. Can they, are we gonna have two that the family could choose?
That's a great question. It's to be determined. I think if you looked at districts' past history, there's never, at least to my knowledge, been a time where we only offered a single option to individuals. That is something that we could do. We have the, we can make that choice, or we could offer 2, or we could even have 3, and some plans could be grandfathered out, and some could still be available for all choices. Those are all things that are really to be determined still at this time.
Yeah, because I mean, there's the benefit of high deductible SHA for some families.
Mhm.
You and I know with a hip,
Sure.
you have a hip done in January, that's done for the year for your family,
Mhm.
your deductible. And you might have kids with hearing aids and stuff like that, that then it's free, pretty much free to use. So I mean, there's people who are planning these large surgeries that are elective, sort of like a knee replacement, hip replacement, stuff like that, into an early year to get that done.
Mhm.
Then maybe next year they choose another plan because they don't foresee any large surgery or anything like that coming up but there is a benefit to the high deductible for some families.
Probably the most significant benefit to offering it is that we happen to have our own employer-funded health plan, right? So if you are, let's say, a new employee coming into the district, and let's say we do offer that, it's very likely to be attractive to college graduates or other folks joining us for the first time, especially when they can get oftentimes most of their health care for free at our wellness clinic. So then their HSA savings account, which is their money, rolls over to the next year and maybe to the next year. So it clearly would be attractive to some staff. But as Brian mentioned, ultimately, the board will weigh in on, offering multiple options. Do you offer just one? Other factors with an HRA, HSA is, what do we fund underneath, let's say, a $5,000 deductible? The level of board funding often determines staff interest, right? So if you only fund $1,000 of a $5,000 plan, you just created a $4,000 deductible, probably not real attractive to people when the other plan doesn't have that. So the closer the board's contribution is to the deductible, the more attractive it is for individuals, but it also has to make fiscal sense. And you could see the differences probably pretty clearly between what would we need to do to stay at 0. What would it maybe look like at like a 3% and maybe a 5%? And that way the committee could continue to plan accordingly, and the board members could wait to receive the information you really need for 23-24 before committing to any significant expenditure like a health insurance premium.
Well, that's what I was looking at, the high deductible and the committee meetings, and it says that, if you went that way, it's almost 23% savings, percent change. for the district, so 3,000, 6,000 out of pocket max. And can that be reduced to 2 and 4? 2,000, 4,000, 1,500, 3,000? What would that do? I mean, do we really need a 20? And it sounds like I'm trying to save money. But if you went to one plan
Yeah,
and
but
we're
if-
trying to be 0,
If we fund the HSA with some of that savings, that would make that pretty attractive. I think it's the funding that.
I think some people see the 3,000, 6,000, you know, especially younger people.
You're right, and I think it's going to be, you know, I like the idea of multiple plans to begin with, because this is, I think, would cause a lot of anxiety in some people until they maybe live it a year and look at what they pay out and what they could have saved. And, you know, I think it's a, you have to become accustomed to a whole different idea of healthcare. And I like what you said about being more aware of what you're using. You know, consumerism is really important. And this encourages that, and people will pay more attention to running to, you know, urgent care or the hospital for, you know, twisted ankle when they could just wait the next day. Those kind of savings to our health, you know, our whole picture is really important. I love what you're looking at and the education, but getting people comfortable with 3,000, 6,000, that's going to be a challenge.
Yeah, I think people will look at their own. I mean, there are people
Yes.
that are a certain age and they have kids with asthma, or they have kids with diabetes or something like that. So they're like, wow, 6,000, that would be great. Because I'm spending right now 10,
Yeah.
you know, to be able to,
Yeah.
you know, so I think it's family situation. When you have other families that don't have a lot of issues where that 6,000 is just a lot, you know, but so that's, I like this option. I like having multiple options as well. But I was just wondering what it would do if that out-of-pocket maximum went down a little bit.
And so that's definitely a question I'll take back to USI, and then they work in conjunction with Dean to get costs on those things. And so we can have that information to share at insurance company.
I'm just glad you're looking at this so.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, as Steven mentioned, it's a lot, it's tremendously helpful to have USI helping with that aspect, because they, you know, they can bring information from so many other districts. But it's, you know, a fundamental need for any part of this is education. You know, we're gonna need to make sure first the people that are making the decisions understand what their parameters of that is. But afterwards, you know, making sure employees understand what are the benefits to you and what are the potential exposures, so that it's an informed choice and that they're making, you know, the right decision for them financially. But those are certainly things that we're working on, so.
So we don't need a decision on anything?
No, I think it's just to start to get the group thinking about it and asking, but it is, as you, you know, if you are pondering this and on your walks and drives and what have you, and you have questions, you know, that would, you know, we could forward on, please, you know, send them to me, and then I can move them on to the insurance committee or to USI or to both, depending on what they are.
Do you know what most people are seeing in the percent increase? So we were locked in for 2 years, but what are most people, other districts, or?
It depends a lot on the carrier. Districts that were with courts, I'm not aware of any that saw less than a double-digit increase. And then I think those with Dean, it really started to depend on what they did with their plan. No, was it our last meeting where Al had shared the trend is 8 to 9%? Does that sound correct? people to in there. So it's, you know, I think one thing that we should feel good about is that, you know, with a 5-year rate lock, one of the fears coming out of it is that we were gonna get slammed in year 6. We've not seen that, right? The actions that we've taken as a district have put us in a good position where we can manage this better than most. And really a linchpin to that is the clinic and in our desire as a district to work towards wellness, right? I mean, those are things that make tremendously impactful in terms of how insurable we are.
Didn't our 5-year lock almost turn into?
They rolled us one, was it, you're right, I mean, they rolled us,
I mean, I think we're very fortunate that we're not.
Lots to consider here. Any other questions, ideas?
Just one question, I guess. I know we've got the committee. Does this ever go back to staff for feedback before? Or is this?
it does, yeah.
Okay.
So really kind of the idea is insurance committee will be our most informed and most involved and produce some options for feedback. And then absolutely, we need to take it out to our employees and gather their feedback too. And then circle it back to the process.
Is that a written feedback survey type?
I think that's what's happened in the past. That would be, I think, how we would envision it. The challenge will be the education needed to be able to have folks answer questions
Right.
will be steep. So how do we do that? I think that's a little bit, I don't have a clear picture of how we get the right information to the people to make the right feedback, give us the feedback, but that's absolutely an important part of the process for
Yeah,
sure.
because it'd be good to know, with the information that you've received, do you favor this plan or this plan? I know sort of like survey, but at least maybe it would help out to say 30, 50, 20.
Yeah.
On 3 different plans or 2.
It's probably fair to say there's going to be significant staff interest in options. Right, and allowing a new option to be a choice, not a requirement, will probably receive very positive feedback. Because in the end, if you aren't going to select that option, you know that it's probably beneficial to others, but not to you. But if it is more of a forced change, the reaction is of course going to be different. So the way the survey is distributed to staff is going to be really important. If we asked a survey question, what would your thoughts be about required health plan design change? That's not going to be viewed positively. But if it is more presented as an option for consideration, I think it would be viewed different. So it really depends on how we intend to present it. And in the past, we have tried to present things as options because we have in our current plan the option to buy the point of service plan, which allows you to go to like the UW if you want to, but that's an individual's choice. And most folks became comfortable with the transition to the HMO plan that we're currently on because they had an option that they could choose if they wanted to. So I would just say that options have been an important part of what we've offered in the past. I think in the end, administratively, we probably would recommend the best way to implement change would to be by individual choice.
Are we ready to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Favor?
Aye.